She vanished after a football game, her choir pin still gleaming under the Sinclair station lights. By morning, the girl with plans for nursing school was nowhere, and the man who offered rides to good kids was leading the prayer circles. For 36 years, a town mourned while the seed elevator sagged in silence and a single culvert went overlooked. Then a spring washout tore through County Line Road, and something surfaced that should never have been buried. A jacket, a cassette, and a voice that no one had heard in decades. Until now. What if the man who prayed for her was the one who sealed her fate? The fluorescent buzz of the Sinclair station cast harsh shadows across Lena Hart's face as she pressed the cold payphone receiver to her ear. Her fingers, still warm from applauding the Wildcats' victory, fumbled with the quarter before sliding it into the slot. "Dad, it's me." She tucked a loose strand of light brown hair behind her ear, her voice carrying the lingering excitement from the evening's performance. The marching band's brass section had nailed the halftime show, and even Mr. Peterson, their usually stoic director, had cracked a smile. "I'm at the Sinclair, yeah, the one by the fairgrounds." She watched her reflection in the scratched phone booth glass, her choir pin catching the light. "No, don't worry about picking me up. I'll walk. 20 minutes, tops." The October wind whistled through the station's empty parking lot, carrying the sweet, sharp scent of harvest. Dried leaves skittered across the cracked concrete as Lena adjusted her blue nylon tote bag, heavy with sheet music and her choir folder. "I know, Dad. I'll be careful." She smiled at his familiar concern. "See you soon." The phone clicked back into its cradle at 10:47 p.m. The numbers, glowing green on her digital watch. Lena pulled her letter jacket tighter and started down the familiar path behind the fairgrounds. The midway stood empty now, Ferris wheels silhouetted against the star-scattered sky like a giant's abandoned toy. Ahead loomed the seed elevator, its weathered bulk a darker shadow against the night. The structure had stood vacant since '86, when the farm crisis had claimed it, along with half the county's family farms. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth in its upper stories. The north wind picked up, sending waves through the surrounding cornfields. The dry stalks rattled like thousands of paper fingers, a sound that had scared her as a child, but now felt as natural as breathing. Her tote bag caught on her jacket as she hitched it higher on her shoulder. There was a small snap, and something metallic glinted as it fell, but Lena didn't notice the silver bracelet tumbling into the grass. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she walked, each step echoing in the empty lot behind the elevator. A car door slammed somewhere in the darkness, the sound bouncing off the elevator's corrugated walls. Lena's steps slowed as she made out the shape of a dark Chevy idling near the building's side entrance, its engine a low rumble in the night air. A familiar Booster Club bumper sticker caught the dim light, the same one she'd seen hundreds of times in the school parking lot. The wind carried fragments of conversation, too distant to make out words. Lena hesitated, one hand clutching her tote bag strap. The Chevy's headlights remained off, but she could see movement inside, shadows shifting behind the windshield. Back at the Hart household, Lena's father glanced at the clock, 11:10 p.m., and flicked off the porch light. He settled into his armchair, expecting any moment to hear the familiar creak of the screen door, announcing his daughter's return. The second hand on the grandfather clock continued its steady march around the dial, each tick marking another moment of her absence. Dawn crept over Windsor Ridge with a bitter October chill. Frost silvered the browning grass and glazed windshields as Mr. Hart paced their living room for the 100th time, wearing a path in the carpet. Mrs. Hart sat rigid at the kitchen table, her untouched coffee growing cold, staring at Lena's bedroom door down the hall. The room remained exactly as it had been yesterday morning. Bed neatly made with its quilted spread, choir folder splayed open on the desk, showing the Ave Verum sheet music they'd practiced Thursday. The leather-bound diary Lena wrote in every night lay unopened on her pillow. At 6:02 a.m., Mr. Hart's trembling fingers dialed the Madison County Sheriff's Office. His wife gripped his free hand as he spoke, her knuckles white. "Our daughter never came home last night." Deputies arrived while the coffee maker sputtered fresh brew into its pot. Their heavy boots left wet marks on the welcome mat as they knocked crystalline frost from the soles. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they began their search, methodically working through the most logical locations. The football field's aluminum bleachers, now silent and empty. The shuttered concession stands with their lingering scent of popcorn and hot dogs. The chain-link fence line bordering the fairgrounds. The Sinclair station's barren parking lot. By noon, volunteers had gathered in clusters, their breath fogging in the cold as they spread out across drainage ditches and along the Middle River's muddy banks. Pickup trucks lined County Road G4R, their drivers ready to expand the search radius. The community moved with purpose, calling Lena's name into the wind. At the old seed elevator, 2 German shepherds from the K9 unit suddenly stiffened, their ears forward and alert. They pulled their handlers toward the storm cellar entrance, noses working the air. For a precious few moments, hope surged through the search party. But the constant rumble of combines in the surrounding fields and the shifting autumn winds scattered whatever scent the dogs had caught. They circled the area in growing confusion, whining in frustration as the trail dissolved. Inside Windsor Ridge High School, a guidance counselor sat in her office with the sheriff's deputy, wringing her hands as she spoke. "Lena seemed troubled last week," she said quietly. "She mentioned someone, an older man, who kept offering her rides after choir practice. She finally told him no, but—" The counselor's voice trailed off. Meanwhile, the church deacon, Mr. Thompson, moved through groups of worried townspeople, organizing prayer circles and urging calm. "We must trust in the Lord's protection," he assured them, his voice steady and familiar. "Lena's a good girl, she'll turn up." In the school's west hallway, the night custodian swept the floors with mechanical precision, his push broom gathering dust and debris. The silver bracelet, its clasp broken, disappeared into his dustpan without a second glance, just another piece of discarded teenage jewelry. As darkness approached, the search teams regrouped. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies across the grid pattern they'd established, casting long shadows across the frost-stiffened fields. Sheriff Miller stood at the command post, his face etched with determination as he assigned deputies to guard the elevator. "Overnight. We'll find something tomorrow," he promised the exhausted volunteers, his voice carrying more authority than he felt. The words hung in the gathering dusk, a fragile thread of hope as the first stars appeared above the darkened cornfields. The weekend wore on with mechanical precision. Saturday's first light found search coordinators hunched over folding tables at the fire station, their coffee-ringed clipboards covered in grid, patterns and patrol assignments. Static crackled through two-way radios as teams reported in from their sectors. "Section D7 clear," came one voice through the hiss. "Moving to E7. In the corner, Deputy Morris spread out the county's infrastructure maps, their edges curling from age. The culvert index, pulled from a dusty filing cabinet, showed its last revision stamp from 1984. What the outdated documents couldn't tell them was that the triple-box culvert running beneath County Line Road had undergone changes. In '86, road crews had sealed one end during an elevation project, leaving the other opening partially obscured by volunteer trees that had sprung up near the old seed elevator lot. Out in the fields, combines crawled through the corn like giant insects, their operators watching the search teams with a mix of sympathy and unease. When approached about accessing their land, farmers gestured at the golden rows heavy with yield. "After the weekend," they'd say, their faces drawn with genuine concern but eyes fixed on the weather forecast. "Can't risk compacting the soil right now." At the command post, exhaustion started creeping in. Detective Wheeler, running on his third cup of gas station coffee, pushed a different angle. "Look at the pattern," he insisted, spreading out a manila folder. "Teenage girl, family, pressure, college applications, classic runaway indicators." The sheriff nodded absently, but his attention was caught by a witness statement describing the dark Chevy. The Booster Club sticker detail seemed promising, but without a plate number, it was another dead end in a case accumulating them by the hour. Near the seed elevator, yellow police tape fluttered in the autumn wind. The storm cellar's heavy padlock hung undisturbed, though the logbook showed an entry from Friday. "Chairs borrowed. Deacon Thompson." The keys had been returned to their hook without comment, the timing a detail that would only matter much later. Sunday evening painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as the search grid contracted. In the fire station, the volunteer wall chart told its own story. Red X's marking cleared areas outnumbered the dwindling sections still to be checked. The initial surge of hope had given way to a creeping sense of futility. Sheriff Miller stood in the Harts' living room, his hat in his hands. "We'll regroup at sunrise," he promised, though his voice carried less conviction than it had Friday night. Fresh eyes might spot something we missed. The porch light cast a lonely glow across their front yard as midnight approached. In Lena's room, Mrs. Hart stood with her daughter's choir sweater pressed against her chest, its wool still holding a trace of Lena's perfume. Her fingers traced the cable-knit pattern as she moved to hang it back in the closet. "It'll be warm tomorrow," she whispered, as if Lena might hear and decide to come home. "She'll need this." The night deepened, and somewhere beyond the circle of porch light, past the edge of their searching, the entrance to the forgotten culvert waited, masked by shadows and volunteer saplings, holding its secret in the darkness. Monday dawned with the industrial hum of television news vans, their satellite dishes reaching into the autumn sky like mechanical sunflowers. The Windsor Ridge High parking lot, usually reserved for faculty and upperclassmen's hand-me-down cars, now hosted 3 Des Moines network affiliates and a cluster of print reporters from the Register. Inside the school's main office, Principal Walker addressed the assembled press. "Classes will resume at noon," he announced, gripping the podium. "We want to ensure our students' safety while supporting the ongoing investigation." Behind him, a counselor posted sign-up sheets for group sessions, though few students would actually attend. By 9 a.m., Sheriff Miller and Deputy Morris stood in the empty choir room, its risers casting ladder-like shadows across the linoleum floor. The space held the lingering scent of floor wax and teenage perfume. Morris thumbed through the sheet music cabinet, while Miller examined the sign-out log for the audio equipment. "Here's something," Morris said, holding up a plastic case. "Maxell tape, labeled Choir, Fall Rehearsal, signed out to Mr. Peterson last month." They borrowed a boombox from the AV room and pressed play. The tape crackled to life with warm-up scales, sopranos and altos weaving through their exercises. Between musical passages, conversation filtered through. "Good pitch, Lena," came a low male voice, followed by gentle laughter. "Our little nurse-to-be hitting those high notes." More scales, then. "Need a ride home, Angel?" The nickname echoed in the empty room, the same one used at Wednesday night prayer meetings. The voice continued, but nothing crossed any clear lines. Just familiar, small-town chatter that now carried a different weight. Across town, Deacon Thompson stood with a cluster of search volunteers near the Middle River bank. "The current's been high since that rain last week," he observed, directing attention downstream. "We should focus our efforts here, not waste time checking every barn and storm cellar in the county." At the sheriff's office, Detective Wheeler worked the phones, following up on the Chevy sightings. "Dark-colored, maybe navy or black," he repeated for the dozenth time. "Booster Club sticker on the back window." Each call led to another booster parent with a clean alibi and genuine concern. By mid-afternoon, the DCI liaison packed evidence bags into his state-issued Crown Victoria. Lena's hairbrush, class photos, fingerprints lifted from the Sinclair phone booth. "The lab will prioritize this," he promised, though no one mentioned the critical piece of evidence, her silver bracelet, already lost in the school's dumpster, swept away with Friday's hallway dust. The autumn sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the search area. Deputies switched on their flashlights for one final sweep, but the atmosphere had changed. Hope was giving way to procedure, urgency morphing into routine. One by one, the portable floodlights winked out around the seed elevator lot, leaving only the natural sounds of evening, crickets warming up their legs, and somewhere a loose metal sign swaying in the cooling air, its hinges marking time with soft, rhythmic clinks. Thursday settled over Windsor Ridge like a heavy wool blanket, damp and suffocating. The morning fog clung to cornfields, where combines now churned through the harvest, volunteers having returned to their regular rhythms. The phone tree that had buzzed with tips and sightings fell silent, save for the occasional wrong number or well-meaning but empty lead. At the Hart residence, the porch light burned steadily, more from muscle memory than purpose now. Mrs. Hart's fingers moved automatically to the switch each dusk, though her eyes no longer searched the growing darkness for a familiar silhouette. By mid-morning, a caller from Winterset claimed to have seen a girl matching Lena's description at a truck stop. 3 patrol cars carved south along Highway 169, their lights cutting through the dreary day. Deputy Morris radioed back 2 hours later. "False alarm. Just another dead end. The rain started around noon, fat drops that turned the search area's clay soil into treacherous slopes. Boot prints from previous days dissolved into formless mud. Along the drainage ditches, water collected in rust-colored pools, washing away whatever traces might have remained. Sheriff Miller's cruiser pulled into the Hart driveway at 2:15 p.m. He removed his hat, raindrops falling from the brim, and settled heavily into their kitchen chair. Steam rose from the untouched coffee Mrs. Hart set before him. "I need to be straight with you folks," he said, his weathered face showing the strain of 6 sleepless nights. "We're running out of fresh leads. You may need to—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Prepare for a long wait." See, words landed in the kitchen like physical things, heavy and final. Mr. Hart's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Mrs. Hart turned to the window, her reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. By evening, the First Presbyterian Church filled with townspeople clutching white candles. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of shared grief. Deacon Thompson stood at the pulpit, his voice carrying to the rafters as he spoke of faith tested and hope sustained. "We must endure," he intoned, hands gripping the polished wood. "The Lord works in His time, not ours." No mention crossed his lips of his summer civic project when he'd helped replace timber supports in the wing walls along County Line Road. Rain drummed against the stained glass windows as the congregation bowed their heads. Near the elevator, water trickled past the hidden culvert mouth, its opening partly obscured by young trees that had taken root in the disturbed soil. The dark passage gaped like a wound in the earth, unnoticed and unremarked. In the Hart living room, the grandfather clock tracked minutes that felt like hours. Thunder rolled overhead, and the lights flickered once, twice. The porch bulb sputtered and went dark. Mr. Hart stood in the doorway, his hand hovering over the switch. The darkness pressed against him from both sides. A storm-black night outside, the shadowed house behind. His fingers trembled near the switch but didn't move. He stood frozen in the threshold, unable to step forward or back, as if turning the light back on would mean admitting something he wasn't ready to face. The clock struck 10, each chime echoing through the silent house. The years after Lena's disappearance stretched like shadows at sunset, each one longer and thinner than the last. Windsor Ridge changed in small ways. The high school added a new wing complete with expanded choir risers that gleamed under fluorescent lights. The seed elevator's metal skin blushed with rust, its shadow growing shorter as pieces fell away each storm season. In the Hart household, time moved differently. Tommy and Sarah Hart grew up watching their parents' careful movements, learning to step softly around certain dates, certain songs, certain memories. They became teenagers who checked in frequently and came home early, their social lives bound by an invisible tether of worry. Under the living room coffee table, a cardboard file box labeled Leads in Mrs. Hart's neat handwriting held their private archive. Inside, letters from anonymous tipsters shared space with photocopied police reports and newspaper clippings. A county map spread across the bottom, its red pushpins fading to salmon pink, where sunlight crept through the window each afternoon. Every few months, Mrs. Hart would sort through it all, straightening papers and replacing worn folders, maintaining order in the one place she still could. Deacon Thompson's transition to civilian life proved seamless. His insurance agency thrived on Main Street, his name in gold leaf on the window. At graduation ceremonies, his voice carried across the gymnasium with the same measured cadence he once used in prayer circles. He organized food drives in winter, delivered eulogies in spring, and shepherded the community through its cycles of joy and grief. His dark Chevy disappeared early on, replaced by a series of sensible sedans that blended with every other car in the church parking lot. Sheriff Miller retired in 2015, passing his files to a new generation of deputies. Among them was Detective Mara Klein, who inherited the Hart case along with a dozen others. Unlike her predecessors, who treated cold cases as exercises in futility, Klein approached each folder with fresh eyes and methodical patience. Every autumn, she would visit the Hart home, usually in the golden hour before sunset. She'd sit at their kitchen table, accepting coffee she rarely drank, and listen. Mrs. Hart would share details she'd remembered, the way Lena's choir robe had needed hemming, the specific ring of her laugh during phone calls. Klein took notes in her precise handwriting, promising to recheck old leads and run new databases. On an evening in October 2018, Klein's county-issued Ford crawled past the intersection of County Line Road. The air held that particular fall sharpness that seemed to sharpen every detail: the uneven grade of the roadbed, the way water collected in certain dips, the line of volunteer trees that had grown thick along the drainage path. Something about the topology nagged at her investigators' instincts. The road's crown seemed too high relative to the surrounding land, suggesting major grade work sometime in the past. She pulled over, cutting the engine, and made a note in her department-issued phone. Request civil works logs. County Line Road improvements, 1985-1990. Check elevation changes, plus drainage modifications. The setting. Sun caught the tops of those volunteer trees, their leaves flickering like signals in the wind. Klein added another note. Map original culvert system. Compare to current drainage pattern. She closed her notebook, but remained parked for several minutes, watching how the shadows gathered in the low spots where water might once have flowed differently. The winter of 2024 punished Iowa's infrastructure with particular cruelty. Temperatures swung wildly between deep freezes and sudden thaws, forcing moisture deep into roadbeds and culverts. By March, County Line Road showed its age through spreading cracks and frost heaves that rattled even the sturdiest pickup trucks. Iowa Department of Transportation crews marked problem spots with neon orange spray paint, plotting repairs for early spring. The aging culvert system, installed decades ago when the road served more farm traffic than commuters, topped their priority list. Work orders cited structural integrity concerns and drainage efficiency issues. April 3rd dawned cool and damp. Doughty vehicles lined the shoulder near the old seed elevator, their amber warning lights pulsing against the morning fog. A yellow Caterpillar backhoe squatted over the culvert's wing wall, its operator following the foreman's hand signals as they prepared to clear winter debris. At 9:17 a.m., the backhoe's teeth bit into the earthen wall. The operator expected routine resistance. Instead, the blade caught and tore through something that shouldn't have been there, rotted wooden timbers that crumbled like wet cardboard. Dark water gushed from the breach, carrying years of accumulated silt and vegetation. Then something blue tumbled out with the debris. The backhoe operator killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, everyone stared at what lay, half buried in the mud. A gym bag, its nylon fabric dulled but intact, partially unzipped to reveal the collar of a letter jacket. Small metal pins caught the morning light. WH Choir 89, spelled out in tarnished brass. The foreman reached for his phone while shouting for everyone to step back. "Nobody touches anything," he ordered, already dialing the sheriff's office. His free hand grabbed a work order from his truck cab. "This end was supposed to be sealed in '86, he muttered, running his finger down the specs. "Both sides sealed. Why wasn't it sealed?" Detective Mara Klein arrived within 20 minutes, her Ford's tires spraying gravel as she parked. She pulled on latex gloves and began documenting the scene, her camera clicking methodically. The gym bag had settled into a depression, water still seeping around its edges. Through the viewfinder, she noted how the letter jacket's fabric had preserved its deep blue color, where it remained zippered, while exposed areas had faded to a ghostly gray. Evidence technicians worked carefully in the mud, marking and photographing each item's position before attempting removal. When they finally lifted the bag, water drained from its seams, revealing a Maxell cassette tape nestled against the jacket's lining. In a nearby fold, barely visible, something small and pale caught Klein's eye, a single tooth, its root intact, trapped in a seam where fabric met zipper. Klein immediately called the DCI lab in Des Moines, requesting priority processing and specific handling protocols for water-damaged evidence. "The cassette needs careful drying," she emphasized. "There might be audio we can recover." As darkness settled over Windsor Ridge that evening, Klein parked outside the Hart residence. She sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts, before walking up the familiar path to the front door. When Mrs. Hart answered, Klein noticed the porch light was still burned out, just as it had been for all these years. "We found something today," Klein said gently, "near the old elevator. I need your permission for a maternal DNA comparison." The DCI lab in Des Moines worked methodically through the water-damaged evidence. Technicians used specialized drying chambers for the cassette, monitoring humidity levels hourly to prevent further deterioration. After 3 days of careful restoration, they transferred the magnetic tape's contents to digital format. The audio began with familiar sounds, sopranos warming up, a piano's broken chord progressions, shuffle of sheet music. But beneath the expected choir room noise, other details emerged. A male voice, warm and authoritative, joked with students between takes. "These Storm Cellar acoustics," he chuckled. "Better than Carnegie Hall, right, Lena?" The tape captured her quiet laugh, followed by his offer of a ride home if you need one. In the background, distinct environmental sounds created an audio fingerprint. A door chime's 3-note sequence and the staticky burst of a CB radio. Detective Klein recognized both immediately. They matched archived recordings from the fire station lounge that shared a wall with the choir room where the Booster Club often gathered after meetings. The lab's DNA results arrived next. The tooth found in the gym bag's seam underwent mitochondrial testing, a specialized analysis that traces maternal lineage. The report left no room for doubt. The genetic markers matched Mrs. Hart's profile at a confidence level that eliminated random chance. Part of Lena had been hidden in that culvert for 35 years. Klein spread decades-old documents across her desk, cross-referencing dates and signatures. The night of the football game yielded 2 critical records: an equipment sign-out sheet showing the deacon had logged chair borrowing access to the elevator storage room, and a volunteer fire department log noting a minor alarm that pulled 3 on-duty responders away from their usual observation point overlooking the elevator lot. The alarm lasted exactly 12 minutes, just long enough for someone to work unseen in the growing darkness. Civil engineering records from 1990 revealed another connection. During a community service day, the deacon had supervised repairs to several culverts along County Line Road, including the replacement of wing wall timbers at the exact location where Lena's belongings were sealed away. His signature appeared on both the work order and the completion certificate. That evening, Klein sat in the back row of the high school auditorium, watching the same man command the stage during the annual scholarship presentations. His silver hair caught the spotlight as he praised the Booster Club's dedication. Her pen moved across her notepad, recording his exact words. "Safety is a community habit," he told the gathered parents, his voice carrying the same warm authority it had on the choir tape. "We look out for each other here in Windsor Ridge. Always have." In the front row, Mrs. Hart sat very still, one hand pressed against her collar. She'd been invited as a special guest. The scholarship committee had created an award in Lena's name. She didn't see Klein in the shadows, comparing the deacon's cadence to the voice on the newly restored recording, building connections between a borrowed key, a convenient alarm, and a culvert repair that had kept its secret for far too long. Detective Klein's investigation spiraled outward through Windsor Ridge's past, pulling threads from memories that had frayed, but never quite broken. She tracked down 3 retired custodians from Windsor High, meeting them at kitchen tables and senior center card games across Madison County. "That bracelet bothered me for years," Ed Whitman said, hands curved around a coffee mug in his small apartment. Now in his 80s, he'd been head of building maintenance in 89. "Silver thing, delicate clasp. Found it near the concession cleanup. Thought it was just post-game trash." His weathered face tightened. "Swept it right into the bin with the popcorn and programs. Didn't know until later." The choir alumni proved harder to locate, scattered across Iowa and beyond. But social media and old yearbooks yielded contact information. Sarah Decker, class of 90, remembered the dark Chevy. "It was always there after practice," she said during a video call from her Des Moines office. "That booster sticker caught the security lights. He'd idle by the elevator, said he was waiting to load chairs or something." She paused, twisting a pen. "The deacon, he had reasons to be around, you know. Church stuff, booster meetings, nobody questioned it." At the county courthouse, Klein pored over vehicle registration, microfiche. The records confirmed what witnesses remembered. A 1987 Chevrolet Caprice dark blue, registered to the deacon from 1988 to 1991. The description matched perfectly, right down to the wheel covers one student had sketched in their statement. But it was the service record that made her pulse quicken. A small garage outside Winterset had done repairs 2 days after Lena disappeared. Replace tailgate latch mechanism. Repair rear bumper. Scuff. Cash payment, no insurance claim. The kind of damage that might come from forcing something heavy into a trunk or pushing against another vehicle. The volunteer firefighters from 1989 were harder to crack. Most remembered the night but deflected questions about the false alarm. Finally, retired Lieutenant Dave Myers agreed to meet at the old station house. That call felt wrong, he admitted, standing where the CB radio used to squat. Like a drill but unplanned. Nobody ever logged who triggered it. He rubbed his neck. 12 minutes dark on the elevator side. Didn't seem important then. Klein spread her timeline across her office wall. The pattern emerged in stark clarity. The deacon signs out elevator keys under pretense of moving chairs. Uses the storm cellar access. Waits for Lena, knowing her route home. The false alarm creates a blind spot. Then, the culvert seal, his own handiwork, hiding evidence beneath tons of concrete and soil. As sunset stained the sky purple, Klein parked her unmarked car near County Line Road. The culvert's elevator side opening gaped like a wound in the earth. She clicked on her headlamp, dropped to hands and knees and crawled inside. The beam caught deep grooves in the concrete floor, angling inward from the mouth. Not watermarks. These were sharp, deliberate, the kind of scrapes left by something heavy being dragged, or someone trying to resist. Klein backed out slowly, dirt staining her knees. She sat in her car, staring at the photos on her phone, the scrape marks, the garage invoice, the choir tape log. Little pieces of truth, preserved by accident and bureaucracy, waiting 35 years to be found. Detective Klein sat at her desk past midnight, carefully constructing the probable cause affidavit. Each paragraph built the case methodically. The culvert discovery, the DNA match, the cassette tape's background sounds placing the deacon near Lena, and the suspicious timing of his civic projects. She'd learned from past cold cases that warrants needed precision, especially when targeting pillars of the community. "We need this executed perfectly," she told the DCI liaison over a secure line. "He's on every committee in Windsor Ridge. One leak, and evidence could disappear." They coordinated teams from 3 counties, planning to converge before dawn when the deacon typically did his morning devotionals. Through careful background work, Klein had discovered the deacon's pride in his family tools. His daughter mentioned during a casual grocery store conversation that her father kept Grandpa's old tools in a locked cabinet, treating them like museum pieces. The same conversation revealed his meticulous record-keeping. Decades of Booster Club ledgers stored in chronological order. At 5:45 a.m., 4 unmarked cars rolled silently into position around the deacon's well-maintained ranch house. The detached garage, with its fresh paint and trimmed foundation plantings, stood dark against the pre-dawn sky. Klein adjusted her vest and nodded to the entry team. The deacon answered the door in striped pajamas and leather slippers, his confusion shifting to something harder when Klein presented the warrant. "We need to access your tool storage and files," she said professionally, watching his hands for tension. In the garage, they found the cabinet described by his daughter, solid oak with a brass lock. Inside, wrapped in an old rag stained with roofing tar, lay a heavy pry bar. The tar had preserved what lay beneath. When the crime scene technicians sprayed phenolphthalein solution on swabbed samples, telltale pink blooms appeared. "Preliminary positive for blood proteins," she murmured, photographing the reactions. The Booster Club records sat in neat binders on garage shelves. September 1989's ledger, open to familiar handwriting. A chair rental notation for the morning after Lena disappeared, the only weekend entry that month. Klein's latex gloves crinkled as she placed the ledger in an evidence bag. "Should I call the church board?" the deacon asked from his doorway, voice steady despite his disheveled appearance. His eyes tracked every movement of the evidence collection team. Klein looked up from sealing a bag. "Call a lawyer," she replied evenly. Her gaze drifted briefly to the garage's center drain, installed during a 1991 renovation. But she kept her focus on the present task, documenting, photographing, preserving the physical links between a trusted man and a decades-old horror. The evidence bags accumulated. The pry bar, the stained rag, the ledger, soil samples, fiber swabs. Each item tagged and logged while the deacon stood silent, hands clasped as if in prayer, watching his carefully maintained facade crack like old concrete. The fluorescent lights of the interview room cast harsh shadows across the deacon's face as he maintained perfect posture in his chair, hands folded neatly. On the metal table, his pajamas had been replaced with a pressed khaki shirt and dark slacks brought by his wife, who waited tearfully in the station lobby. "I barely knew the girl," he said, voice steady as church bells. Chair loans were standard practice for community events. "Check the ledgers. You'll find dozens of similar entries." Detective Klein nodded, her expression neutral. She placed a slim laptop on the table and pressed play. The digitized audio crackled through small speakers. Scales first, then chatter, and finally his younger voice. "These storm cellar acoustics are something else, aren't they, Lena?" The deacon's composure cracked slightly, a thin fissure in weathered stone. His fingers tightened against each other until the knuckles went white. "That's you in the fire station lounge next to the choir room," Klein said quietly. "We can hear the door chime and CB, radio in the background. You were alone with her there 2 weeks before she disappeared." "I counseled many students," he replied, but his voice had lost its hymnal certainty. Klein laid out photographs in a precise line: the pry bar, microscope images of blood protein reactions, soil analysis charts. The trace evidence unit found blood proteins preserved under that tar residue. The soil particles embedded in the tool's edge match samples from the culvert where we found her belongings. She placed a timeline document between them. "Here's what we know. You signed out keys to the elevator storage room that night, claiming you needed chairs. A false alarm pulled firefighters away from the area at a convenient time. An alarm that originated from your pager code. 2 days later, you had unexplained damage repaired on your Chevy, the same vehicle witnesses saw idling by the elevator." The deacon's lips pressed into a bloodless line as Klein continued. "We believe you offered Lena a ride, took her to the storm cellar, and assaulted her there. Her bag ended up in that culvert. Then you sealed her remains behind those timbers the next summer, calling it community service." "I need a break," he said abruptly, standing with jerky movements. "And I need to speak with my attorney." Klein watched him hurry from the room, his carefully pressed shirt now damp with sweat. In the hallway, she found the Union County attorney waiting. "It's stronger than we hoped," she said, keeping her voice low. "The forensics tie him directly to the culvert site. The cassette puts him alone with her before it happened. The false alarm and vehicle repair add supporting circumstance." The attorney nodded. "But no eyewitness." "No direct witness," Klein confirmed. "But 36 years of silence are about to break." Outside, the October evening had turned cold and sharp. Klein's cruiser crunched over fallen leaves as she drove the familiar route to the Hart House. The porch light was on. It had stayed on since they'd found the bag in April. She parked, straightened her jacket, and walked up the worn path to deliver news that would change everything. After decades of questions, they were finally ready to make an arrest. Dawn broke over Windsor Ridge with October frost glazing the sidewalks. Detective Klein's unmarked car led 2 patrol units down Maple Street, their headlights cutting through lingering darkness. Houses stood silent, porch lights winking out one by one as morning crept in. The deacon was already awake, retrieving his newspaper in pressed khakis and a blue cardigan. He looked up at the sound of crunching gravel, his face a mask of dignified resignation as Klein stepped from her vehicle. "I assume you have the paperwork?" he asked quietly, folding the unopened paper with careful corners. "Yes, sir." Klein produced the warrant while her backup positioned themselves. "You're under arrest for the murder of Lena Hart." Curtains twitched in neighboring windows. Sharon Miller from 3 doors down stood in her bathrobe on her front step, hand pressed to her mouth. The Andersons emerged in matching flannel, their coffee mugs steaming forgotten in their hands. As Klein read him his rights, the deacon's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, the church prayer chain lighting up with impossible news. Across town, teenagers at early band practice checked their parents' urgent texts. "The deacon?" Bandroom whispers turned to shocked social media posts, rippling through Booster Club alumni groups and PTA threads. The cruiser's back door closed with a solid click. The deacon sat straight backed, eyes forward, as neighbors photographed his final drive away from the house where he'd hosted graduation parties and coordinated food drives for decades. By mid-morning, the search teams had returned to County Line Road. Ground-penetrating radar equipment hummed over the culvert's exposed sections, while evidence technicians sifted through debris from the collapsed wing wall. A DCI analyst called Klein. Over, holding up a clear evidence bag containing a rusted key ring, heavy with oxidation but intact. Found it under 6 inches of compacted silt, the analyst said. The tags are degraded, but the cuts match the profile for seed elevator storm cellar access from that period. At the courthouse, the deacons hastily retained defense counsel, argued procedural points with practiced indignation. This is a small-town vendetta, he insisted to reporters. Evidence allegedly preserved for 36 years in a road culvert, the chain of custody is impossible to verify. The county attorney stood on the courthouse steps an hour later, her response measured but firm. We have DOT maintenance logs documenting exactly when and how that culvert section was sealed. We have soil composition matches, fiber evidence, and chemical analysis of blood proteins. This isn't about small-town politics. It's about science and patience finally revealing the truth. Evening settled over the Hart family kitchen, where the same oak table had anchored their grief for nearly 4 decades. The same light fixture cast familiar shadows as Klein updated them on the day's developments. Mrs. Hart turned a package of porch light bulbs in her weathered hands, running her thumb over the plastic wrapper, but making no move to open it. We'll proceed carefully, Klein assured them, her notebook open to fresh pages. Every detail, every fiber, every grain of soil tells part of Lena's story. We're going to make sure we tell it right. The bulb package stayed on the table between them, its promise of light waiting like justice. Patient, inevitable, but not quite ready to shine. The Madison County Courthouse's wood-paneled courtroom creaked with tension as pre-trial hearings entered their second day. Morning. Light filtered through tall windows, catching dust motes above the gallery's worn oak benches. Your Honor, this cassette could have been tampered with at any point in 36 years, defense counsel argued, gesturing at the evidence table where the Maxell tape sat in its protective case. We have no way to verify its authenticity or continuous custody. The choir director, now silver-haired but straight-backed, took the stand. Her testimony was clear and steady. That tape stayed in the locked music office filing cabinet until 1995, when we digitized the choir archives. I personally labeled each container and noted dates of transfer. The DCI forensic audio specialist followed, explaining modern authentication techniques. The background noise signatures, specifically the fire station radio squawk and door chime, match preserved recordings from that facility. You can't fake analog tape compression patterns from that era. By afternoon, a retired volunteer firefighter shifted uncomfortably in the witness box, his hands clasped tight. Yes, the pager alert that night was unusual. No drill was scheduled. I checked the logbook next day. Nothing written down about who called it. The DOT engineer's testimony turned technical, complete with cross-sections and flow diagrams. Standard practice requires sealing both faces of a decommissioned culvert to prevent debris accumulation. The partial seal here created an artificial cavity that could trap and preserve materials against normal washout patterns. The elderly garage clerk squinted at old invoice copies, her arthritis-curved fingers tracing the lines. That's Mr. North's signature, all right. I remember because he was particular about the paperwork. Came in 2 days after that poor girl went missing. Wanted the bumper checked and the tailgate latch tightened. The defense's cross-examination grew sharp. And you remember one repair from 36 years ago? I remember because he was on the church board, she replied firmly, and because he never brought that Chevy back again after that day. The judge called counsel to the bench late in the day, their hushed conference barely reaching the first row. The prosecution argued for admission of the pry bar. Evidence. The blood protein preservation under tar, the soil composition match. These aren't coincidental. Speculation and prejudice, the defense countered, but the judge's ruling was measured. I'll allow the forensic testimony with clear limiting instructions to the jury. The scientific methodology appears sound. In the gallery, faces hardened into camps. Long-time church members sat rigid, some clutching prayer books, while others leaned forward with years of suspicion finally confirmed. The deacon's insurance office staff huddled near the back, their loyalty warring with dawning horror. Mrs. Jensen from the quilting circle dabbed her eyes, whispering, "But he helped search." Detective Klein gathered her notes as the bailiff called recess, the day's weight settling into her shoulders. Outside, crickets chirped in the courthouse lawn's shadows, and a harvest moon hung low over Main Street. She paused on the steps, remembering the inward-angled scrape marks in the culvert, imagining a frightened alto's footsteps fading behind the fairground fence into darkness. The evidence was holding, each piece connecting like the choir harmonies on that old cassette, building toward a truth the town could no longer deny. The Madison County Courthouse buzzed with whispered tension as the trial began on a crisp October morning. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of spectators. Church members, former students, reporters from Des Moines papers. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching dust motes above the jury box. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Martinez approached the jury with measured steps, spreading a large aerial photo of Windsor Ridge across an easel. September 29th, 1989, she began, her voice steady. A football game ends. A girl calls home, and then she placed a red pin on the seed elevator, here, where everything changed. The prosecution's timeline unfolded through a parade of witnesses and exhibits. Deputies who worked the original search testified about the cadaver dog's alert near the storm cellar. Engineers explained how the culvert's improper sealing created the perfect hidden chamber. Crime scene photos from 2025 showed the mud-caked gym bag, the corroded letter jacket pins, the single preserved tooth. Then came the cassette. The courtroom fell silent as the digitized audio played through modern speakers. Warm-up scales echoed first, then casual chatter. A male voice, instantly recognizable as younger version of the deacon, joked about playing nurse. Laughter. More scales. Then that key phrase. "These storm cellar acoustics are something else, aren't they, Lena?" Fire Captain James Wheeler testified next. "That CB squawk in the background? That's our specific tone pattern from '89. We still have the original equipment logs." He pointed out the matching sound signatures on a digital wavelength display. The forensics testimony grew technical but devastating. Dr. Sarah Chen from the DCI lab detailed how the pry bar's protected blood proteins survived under layers of tar. The particulate analysis from the tool edge matches the distinct soil composition from the culvert site, she explained, displaying microscope photos. The probability of this match occurring randomly is extremely low. An elderly custodian, Albert Mills, hunched forward in the witness stand. "Yes, I remember sweeping up a silver bracelet that week. Thought nothing of it then. Kids were always losing things after games." His voice cracked. "Wish I'd known." The defense mounted their counter-narrative through afternoon testimony. Church board members praised the deacon's decades of community service. A sound expert suggested the cassette could have been altered. The defense attorney, William Drake, hammered repeatedly on the lack of complete remains. "One tooth," he emphasized, pacing before the jury. "After 36 years, one tooth and some old choir banter are supposed to destroy this man's life." But in closing arguments, Martinez wove the evidence into an undeniable pattern. She traced the deacon's access to the elevator, his suspicious vehicle repair, the falsified fire page that cleared witnesses from the area. She played the cassette one final time, letting the jury hear his familiar voice echo through decades. "He chose Lena because she trusted him," Martinez concluded. "He used that trust to isolate her, and when the search began, he literally sealed her fate behind those culvert timbers, knowing his reputation would deflect suspicion. For 36 years he stood at graduations, led prayers, sold insurance to her grieving neighbors, all while knowing exactly where she was. As the jury filed out for deliberation, Mr. and Mrs. Hart sat motionless in the front row. Their clasped hands trembled slightly, knuckles white with tension. Behind them, the deacon stared straight ahead, his expression unchanged since the cassette first played his younger voice through the courtroom speakers. The verdict sliced through the courtroom's tension at 4:17 p.m. "On the count of kidnapping in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of felony murder, we find the defendant guilty." Each word landed like a stone in still water, rippling through rows of spectators who had known both victim and villain as fixtures of their small town. A hush held for 3 heartbeats. Then Mrs. Hart's sob broke free, a sound caught between relief and renewed grief. Around her, the gallery's murmur swelled as decades of certainty crumbled. Church members who had praised the deacon's devotion now whispered behind trembling hands. Former students who had trusted him with choir rides stared at the floor, recalculating every memory. The judge's gavel cut through the noise. "Order!" The defendant will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. 2 weeks later, the same courtroom filled for impact statements. Mrs. Hart approached the podium, clutching yellow notebook paper, her voice steady as she described 36 years of Christmas stockings never filled, graduation seats left empty, grandchildren who would never know their aunt. Behind her, Mr. Hart gripped the bench, shoulders rigid as she spoke of porch lights and midnight vigils. Lena's younger sister read from a diary entry dated October 1989. "Mum keeps saying you'll come home, but I saw her hiding your choir robe today. The deacon led prayers for you again, and I wanted to scream." The deacon maintained his forward stare as Judge Marshall delivered the sentence. "This court rarely sees such calculated betrayal of community trust," she declared. "You engineered not just a murder, but decades of silence, using your position to deflect suspicion while a family suffered without answers. The sentence is life without possibility of parole." Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters clustered around Detective Klein. "Is this closure for Windsor Ridge?" a Des Moines Register journalist asked, microphone extended. Klein adjusted her blazer against the autumn chill. "It's an answer," she replied carefully. "But closure suggests an ending. We'll continue searching the culvert corridor and storm cellar. The Harts deserve to recover everything we can find." That evening, Mr. Hart stood on his front porch, a fresh light bulb in his weathered hands, the same porch where he'd waited that September night, where hope had burned out bulb by bulb. His fingers trembled slightly as he twisted the new bulb into place. The light snapped on, bright and clean against the gathering dusk. This time it wasn't a beacon calling Lena home. It was a spotlight on 36 years of averted eyes and polite deferrals, illuminating how evil had hidden behind hymns and booster meetings, while a girl's fate lay sealed in concrete and shadow. Across County Line Road, DOT crews installed a heavy iron grate over the new culvert mouth. A small bronze plaque marked the spot. Evidence Recovery Site, Lena Hart Case, April 2025. The formal language couldn't capture the full weight of what had been unearthed here. Not just evidence, but a town's comfortable illusions. Detective Klein made one final stop at sunset. She parked beside the seed elevator, its hollow spaces growing darker as day faded. Wind whispered through missing boards, carrying decades of dust and secrets. Standing in the gravel lot where Lena had last been seen, Klein spoke quietly to the empty air. "We'll keep looking," she promised, "until nothing's left to hide."